This is Business Weekend with Ross Greenwood.
Hi there and welcome to Business Weekend. It's great to have your company. Coming up on the program today, we go live to Queensland and to northern New South Wales as insurance companies start to assess the extent of the storm damage. We'll also hear from the Chief Executive of Australia's biggest insurer, IAG, plus the head of Suncorp's Consumer Insurance Division. And we'll check in with the region's farming communities to gauge the extent of crop and food damage there. We'll also update you on the Stars Rescue Plan, which will see it sell its half share of the $3.6 billion Queen's Wharf Casino in Brisbane, and we'll work out the government's political strategy now that it has to deliver a federal budget. So all that and plenty more coming up on today's program. But look, let's start with the pickle that Cyclone Alfred has caused for the Albanese government. It blew away Labor's option to call an April election. Ruben Spargo.
Beyond the human and environmental toll, a financial blow is emerging as the government prepares to unveil its budget. The Prime Minister has ruled out calling an election in the coming days. He claims he's prioritising the response to this weather event. That includes having financial support ready to be activated. A one-off disaster payment will be available for those who are badly affected and need help immediately. A recovery allowance will assist those who are unable to work after this event. It can be provided for up to 13 weeks. Anthony Albanese's decision to delay calling an election means the government will deliver a budget on March 25 before heading to the polls in May.
This will have an impact on the national economy. There's no question about that. Already it's having an impact. Businesses are closed. People are unable to go to work. The human impact is one thing. The environmental impact is significant, but the economic impact is as well. We will be making that assessment in the coming days.
The government has also requested assistance from the Australian Defence Force to bolster the local response. Sandbags have been supplied on top of 190 personnel and 30 high-clearance vehicles. Search and rescue aircraft are ready to go. The Prime Minister is hoping to head north in the coming days before returning to Canberra for a cabinet meeting on Tuesday.
And today, the PM laid out his agenda when he was asked about the ramification for the federal poll of Labor's WA election victory yesterday.
We will always do what we can to assist people. That is one of the defining characteristics of my term of government.
So the government will deliver a federal budget on March 25. The election is likely to be in May. The government emboldened by Rogers Cook's election victory, but it will take all of Treasurer Jim Chalmers' accomplished communication skills to deliver that budget. It'll show more than $1 trillion worth of Labor's own debt and also deficits or losses in the foreseeable future. And that opens up a debating point about the spending of Anthony Albanese and his cabinet colleagues. Just a couple of charts to show you. From the Department of Finance monthly update, the government's deficit or loss for the year to January this year, $37.1 billion. Yet in December, for the full year, it was supposed to be less than $27 billion. In May, when the budget was last delivered, that's like May last year, it was $28.3 billion. So in other words, it's blown out. Remember, after two surpluses, the May budget showed a decade of deficits where debt continues to be racked up. And that was confirmed in December's MyEFO, with the next 3 years seeing persistent government losses. Making things hard for the government are commodity prices. Oil and gas, coal and iron ore, all well off their high points, punching a hole in the budget right now. But helping the government is the better-than-expected employment market. All along, the budget and MyEFO update in December predict a 4.5% unemployment rate in this financial year. But sitting right here, right now, the unemployment rate is just 4.1% and likely to remain around that level. Now, remember, around half of the government's revenue comes from PAYG taxpayers. So strong employment leads some economists, like Chris Richardson, for example, to suggest the final deficit could be up to $11 billion less than forecasts, adding to the government's economic management credentials. That's because more people are working. So let's bring in here the independent economist Warren Hogan, and also live from Washington, Professor Stephen Hamilton at the George Washington University. Can I start with you, Stephen? And that is, go to you and basically ask the question. I mean, yes, the government's going to deliver a budget. Yes, it's going to show ongoing deficits. But the reality is that government spending, along with revenue, has really taken off. This is almost a record government in terms of recent memory for spending.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot of talk about two surpluses in a row. There's a lot of talk about budget responsibility, but there's two numbers that I think sum everything up. The government's currently forecasting a $27 billion deficit this year, as you said. Since it came to office, it has taken decisions. So this has nothing to do with, good news, bad news. This is active decisions by the government that have worsened the budget position by $21 billion. So if the government hadn't taken those decisions, or if the government had offset those decisions with savings or with new revenue, it would have been running, almost a balanced budget. Right. So almost the entirety of the deficit we see is due to things they've chosen to do. So I can't look at that and say, this is a government with good fiscal prudence.
It's interesting, Warren, isn't it? Because one thing that I seem to observe, I don't know whether anybody else spots this, but every time the Prime Minister seems to go out somewhere, there's $2 billion here for this, there's a couple of $1 billion for roads, there's the new family support package, there's always something, there's just money coming out. That seems counterintuitive with a cost of living crisis where households are having to trim their budgets. The government just seems to keep on spending more. And that comes up in the stats that this is genuinely one of the highest spending governments in recent times.
Oh, it's the highest spending government this country has ever seen. And $2 billion doesn't get you what it used to. And that's part of the problem. Inflation has helped the budget a lot through bracket creep. And this government, as Stephen just alluded to, has been out there spending it. They have actually had the opportunity to do what governments in Australia have been doing for the last 40 years, and that's get back to balance sustainably. But the thing that's really changed with this government is they've completely thrown out the Charter of Budget Honesty, and there is no ambition to return the budget to balance at any stage in the future, maybe 10 years down the track, which is just mythology. So, yeah, they are throwing money around. And, of course, the big issue is that structural shift in the size of government in our economy, which is the biggest we have seen since the late 60s, early 70s, is going to have tremendous implications and is having tremendous implications for the rest of us. It is squeezing out everyone else. And you're seeing that in the labour market, this narrative that the public sector spending and the public sector generation of jobs is saving the economy from recession in the face of a weak private sector simply doesn't bear out the reality of the matter. They're squeezing the private sector out.
So I want to put it to you that this government, which you might have had hopes for a Labor government being a reforming type Hawke-Keating style government where it, sort of privatises things and really tries to address, sort of issues with the business sector. In many ways, it's become as much a centralised government as we have seen in recent times. And that, in many ways, is of concern to the business community.
Well, yeah, and it is a reforming government because they are changing our society and economy in ways that are completely at odds with what we've been doing for the last 40 years. Hawke and Keating reformed this economy, from top to toe to allow market signals and market prices to be the main driver of what happens in our economy. And they are walking that back. And so they are reforming. It's just that it's reforming in a way that a lot of people don't think of reform. We think of reform, particularly us economists, as a way to make the economy more efficient, to make the allocation of resources more effective, and of course take advantage of technology and all this sort of stuff. What we've been doing for 40 years, they aren't doing this. They are centralising, as you say. They are big government. And of course, all these jobs that are being generated in health and social assistance, which is their care economy initiative, are phenomenal quantum. It's the biggest employer in the economy by a mile. But it's destroying productivity in our economy and living standards for everyone. So that's the question I think has to be asked of the Treasurer and the Prime Minister is, What are you going to do about productivity? What are you going to do about the living standards of all Australians?
I was going to ask Stephen Hamilton exactly that question, because here is the chart looking at the compensation of employees on a quarterly basis, which you can see remains very, very high, but it's also the share of the employment market that government now represents, both state and federal. We know of the spending spree that the states have gone on, that it risks their credit ratings right now. But that is a fundamental problem about a centralised sort of economy, a more centralised government-controlled economy.
Yeah, since the government was elected, government spending as a share of GDP has gone from about 24.5, which was its long-run average. It hovered around there for decades, and it's jumped right up to 27.5. So that's the fastest run-up in government spending since the Whitlam government. Now, yes, Warren and I are very concerned about inflation. We're very concerned about interest rates. We're concerned about the short-term macroeconomic management, and it matters for that. But there's a bigger problem, which is ultimately governments can help determine the long-run growth trajectory of the economy. And that over decades is really what determines our standard of living, right? And every dollar we move from the private sector to the public sector, we've got to pay for that. We've got to pay for that with taxes that act like a handbrake on our economy, right? So, I am genuinely quite concerned about the long-run growth prospects for Australia with government spending that I think is not well designed. It's not super efficient. It's not well targeted. We get a huge amount of waste in things like the NDIS. We've had massive amount of waste in defence in history. So if we don't sort of get that public side of our economy working more efficiently and restrain it to the degree we can, as Warren said, I think it will come at a huge cost to the private sector and ultimately to our living standards. Because
everybody talks productivity, but you can also talk competitiveness. Because the fact of the matter is, with energy policy driving up the price of energy, with wages policies that drive up the price of wages, with tax policy that leaves Australia's taxes much higher than they are overseas, Australia's private sector, being crowded out by government, makes its choice and says, we can make more money in America. We're going to shift capital to the United States rather than leave it in Australia because it's a bigger market and we can make more money there.
Yeah, so when I said in the current financial year, the government has taken $21 billion of spending decisions, imagine what $21 billion could have bought us in making our tax system more competitive, right? Imagine the kind of investment incentives we could have put in place. Imagine the personal income tax rates we could have in place. We could have done generational reform to our kind of capital income tax system. We could have done all sorts of things that would have made our economy more productive, raised our GDP per capita, made us all richer. But instead, we've chosen an alternative path. And so, we have to be constantly thinking as economists about that opportunity cost. What was the alternative that we gave up? $21 billion in a single year is a truly extraordinary amount of money, more than stage 3 tax cuts cost, for example. And we just kind of frittered it away over a few years without really thinking about its consequences. And I think if we keep doing that year after year after year, we're going to run into serious trouble. I mean, I've said, the former Singaporean Prime Minister said that we'll become the poor white trash of Asia. And I think, if we keep on this track, that's exactly what we'll be.
I'll tell you what, this is one of the really interesting things for Jim Chalmers, in particular delivering the budget, where the cost of living is an issue that still confronts people. Inflation might have come down, but that doesn't mean prices have come down. And this is going to be the big trouble for the government trying to deliver, because every time there seems to be a problem, the government seems to turn up and say, listen, we've got plenty of money, we'll try and solve your problem. And that is not really the answer long term.
Yeah, and the problem they've got politically is that people are going to see that it's not actually working. That is, these temporary one-off payments, whether it's energy or rent or whatever.
Because, and just to jump in there, because the prosperity of Australians is going backwards.
Well, it's because the cost of living crisis is still there, because they're failing to address the underlying problem, which is an inflation cost pressure in our community driven by a combination of really stimulatory fiscal policy, massive government spending, and of course, I think probably interest rates that aren't quite high enough. But whatever the argument of the policy mix, the fact is people are, this idea that inflation's come down, the printed CPI is mythology. They've poisoned that with these subsidies. Inflation is running at 3 to 3.5. You go back 10, 15 years, if we'd had inflation of that level, any of our other central banks would be, having nightmares about how much they've got to raise rates, and we're cutting rates, and inflation's above target. And the reality is for Australians, the cost of their food bill every week, their cost of their electricity every quarter, excluding the subsidies, is not going down. And so the government throws all this stuff saying it's cost of living relief, but people know it's not changing. Their living standards are still going down. And another part of this, which the government will not talk about, is bracket creep. Their tax burden for the middle part of Australia is getting larger. So that's a big player in how all Australians are feeling less well off.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, when you go there, Stephen, because normally if you've got a 4.1% unemployment rate, which Australia has, there should be prosperity. People should feel good. But the reality is that people are not feeling good at the moment, and that kind of turns up in a lot of the opinion polls.
Yeah, so, I mean, the positive side of the government story is that they have the strongest labour market just about in Australian history, right? It is extraordinary. We have an all-time record employment level, and we have a very low unemployment level, right? We're right around 4%. It's hard to imagine it sustainably below that level. It's well below what the RBA, for example, assumes is sustainable. So, that strong labour market is great. It does potentially, open the possibility for wage growth. It does obviously bring people into the workforce, and that's great for them. But we have to ask ourselves what the cost of that was and whether we got the balance right. And so, the RBA runs a sort of full employment target with its inflation target. It's meant to manage both of those targets. It's nailed the employment target, right? Nailed it right on, as low as it could possibly be, but at a very significant cost of living standards over the last 3 years, right? We have a sort of a 10% reduction in people's disposable income. We've got a 20% increase in the price level. So I think, particularly the RBA has to do some serious soul searching, I think, over the coming years as to whether they got that balance right, what the costs were. And of course, the government needs to think hard about whether it made the situation worse, which, I think Warren agrees. I think the evidence shows is pretty clearly the case.
Indeed. Stephen Hamilton in Washington, many thanks for your time. And Warren Hogan here in the studio as well. Many thanks for your time as well.
Thanks, Ross.
Well, now let's turn to Queensland and the cyclone that genuinely has changed the course of politics this year. Our Gold Coast reporter, Lauren Forbes, has been braving the elements these past few days and joins me now. Lauren, look, the storm really hasn't passed because I know there's a lot of rainfall coming down in many regions right now. The real worry is flooding through southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales.
Look, there still is a big element of that flood risk. We're expected to see rain totals of up to 400 millimetres today. Now, the Prime Minister, he's revealed earlier today that he will be flying up. He's going to make a visit to Enoggera Barracks, which is in northwest of Brisbane, Ross. Now, he is expected to meet ADF personnel there, as that's the base there. And that comes after a collision that occurred on the outskirts of Lismore yesterday, which injured a number of ADF personnel. Now, this system, it is weakening in strength, but it's still, as you can see behind me, delivering destructive winds, torrential rain and flash flooding. So there are a number of flood warnings in place as we go to air, and the Prime Minister has echoed that messaging that the risk here is far from over. Despite the system weakening in strength, it's still delivering those dangerous conditions.
The situation in Queensland and northern New South Wales remains very serious due to flash flooding and heavy winds. Heavy rainfall, damaging wind gusts and coastal surf impacts are expected to continue over coming days. I urge everyone to continue to listen carefully to the emergency authorities. Tragically, last night it was confirmed a 61-year-old man has died in floodwaters near Dorrigo in New South Wales.
Now, Ross, just to give you an idea of the conditions, I'm located here on the Gold Coast, here in Broadbeach waters, and it's a soggy mess. The rain continues to pour down. We'll just pan over here to show you the conditions. We're on the canals here in Broadbeach waters. You can see the rain is relentlessly pouring down, and the water levels here, actually, I've lived here for a number of years. I've never seen them this high. They're now creeping up to the back of people's backyards, and we are expecting another 400 millimetres of rain over the next 24 hours. So it could really creep up into people's backyards, potentially damaging their households. But really, it is that flood risk that is the major concern for today and the coming days, especially across southeast Queensland and northern parts of New South Wales, plus the destructive winds. We could see up to 90 kilometres per hour. So that means that more trees could topple down and more power outages. As we go to air, Ross, about 328,000 people, Queenslanders rather, are in the dark. A big portion here are also without power, around 130,000 people. So the main message at the moment is to stay indoors for the next 24 hours as these damaging conditions keep thrashing parts of southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. The risk is far from over.
Indeed. Many thanks, Lauren Forbes, there on the scene on the Gold Coast. We're also hearing places such as Hervey Bay have been really significantly damaged as well. Well, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is set to visit Queensland to assess the damage left by the ex-tropical cyclone Alfred. We heard from Lauren Forbes, but we're also going to hear from the Insurance Council on Friday. Said insurance companies had started to become inundated with claims relating to the damage. Though it's too early to say at the moment, according to the Insurance Council. Let's just find out on the spot now from the Chief Executive of Suncorp's Consumer Insurance, Lisa Harrison. Lisa, you're in, obviously, your control centre in Sydney, I know you are. Just explain what sort of call rates have you got coming in regards to insurance claims?
Yeah, good morning, Ross. As you've just heard, this is still an unfolding situation. What we have seen over the last couple of days, we've seen about 1,000 claims lodged from our customers. We know those numbers will increase. They'll increase today as power is restored, people return to their homes. And also we are very mindful of the intense rainfall and winds that continue in Brisbane and the Northern Rivers region.
Yeah, so this isn't over. That's the whole point that we're trying to say here. And so you're right to say that a lot of the damage may come in future days. And the real problem is that flooding is has historically been the most significant of all of the insurance claims that companies such as yours will take.
Yeah, as you just heard the Prime Minister say, this is a serious weather system and flood is a real risk. And we're very mindful in terms of a lot of that flood risk is in the areas that were impacted in 2022. And so our thoughts are with those communities and just reinforced to make sure that they are listening to emergency services.
Yeah, OK. So just in regards to what people might do if they come and find damage or a roof is missing or something of that nature, who actually is obliged to go and fix that? They obviously have got possessions inside. They're going to try and get tarps up. Do those tarps come from you? Do they come from the SES? Who do they come from? How do they start the whole process?
So, Ross, our team are ready. They're ready on the phones. We've got great digital capability. We're ready to make emergency repairs. And obviously, we work hand in glove with the SES to make sure our customers are safe. We can also put in place temporary accommodation for those homes that are unlivable. So when it is safe to do so, we would encourage our customers to get in contact and we'll work through the path forward for them. And also I do want to say a very big shout out to the SES who are doing amazing work across Queensland and New South Wales. We're proud supporters of the SES and they're out in force doing incredible work. So a very big thank you to them.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And once you get assessors on the ground, that's the next phase, isn't it? To be able to get your own people out to see the damage, to basically make some assessment of costs and then to get those claims paid.
Yeah, so we're very keen to get our team out on the ground when it's safe to do so. We've also got proactive calls to many of our customers that we suspect might be in impacted regions, and would encourage people to get in contact with us in terms of helping them on their path to recovery. What I would say is for those customers who do have damage in the homes, wet homes as well, is you can feel free, just take photos of the damage and if you do need to remove things out of the home, that's perfectly fine. But do take photos and keep lists of damaged items.
Suncorp's Head of Consumer Insurance, Lisa Harrison, many thanks for your time on the program today.
Thank you, Ross.
Well, coming up after the break, we check in with the boss of Australia's biggest insurer, Nick Hawkins from IAG. We'll also check in with farmers in the weather-affected regions of both New South Wales and Queensland. Thanks for being with us here on Business Weekend. Well, we've just heard from Suncorp, Queensland's biggest insurer. We should also check in with Australia's biggest insurer, that's IAG. Its Chief Executive, Nick Hawkins, is with us now via the phone. Nick, many thanks for your time. I just want to take you through what you're seeing, what you're hearing from your people now on the ground. Are the insurance claims starting to come in for you?
Hi, Ross. At this stage, compared to sort of probably where we thought we were going to be on Thursday or Friday, obviously this cyclone has slowed down a lot. And so then the sort of the volume of activity versus probably our expectations is definitely lower. So we've got 400 or 500 claims that have come in already. And we were certainly setting ourselves up for many more than that. And of course, the real challenge now is there's a lot of rain and weather coming with this cyclone or ex-cyclone. That's going to appear over the next couple of days. We've got 300,000 people without power. So our view would be is that there's obviously going to be a lot of activity in the next couple of days as power is restored. The impact of some of the rain and such impacts the communities, and we're expecting a lot more claims the next couple of days than what we've currently received.
You and I have talked over the years many times about the impact on communities of big weather events and of flooding in particular. Now, the question that we know is that insurance becomes prohibitively expensive in some communities. And in fact, many people choose not to have insurance. That's no way to run our economy. Is it a case now that this is a wake-up call for government, state and federal, that they need to do more to protect these communities so they can actually get the insurance for their house or for their business?
Yeah, Ross, it's an issue for all of us, I think, because rightly or wrongly, we know that there's going to be increased frequency and severity of these large events. We know that as a country, over the last 100 or so years, we've built towns and communities in places that are going to be subject to in harm's way. We are investing. There is mitigation happening now, but, it's a multi-generational investment program I think that our country needs. And that sort of needs to be the responsibility of local council, state governments, federal governments, but actually I think all of us, because there are individual steps people can take around their things that actually can help mitigate risk as well. So I think it's really an all-in country topic that, we must make some changes here. We already are, but we must, whatever we're doing, it's not going to be enough. And so over the next 10, 20, 30 years, we must invest in this topic to really strengthen the resilience of our country.
It's often, a lot of people might be critics of insurance companies, whatever it might be, but I've often said you see the very best in our community. It doesn't matter whether it's the SES, the volunteers, or whether it's insurance assessors and your people just working the phones. You actually see the very best of the insurance industry at these times of stress.
Yeah, there's nothing sort of more humbling than being in a recovery centre after an event like this, where you see exactly what you just said. You see the best of people, and you see people sort of genuinely trying to work through issues and challenges that communities have had and try to get to a better outcome. Flood is a difficult event to manage for everybody because of the devastation that occurs, and then this sort of drying out period that then occurs, which really means that you can't immediately fix properties up if they've been flooded, that you need to make sure they're dried out, and then we sort of undertake repair work, and that can be frustrating for everyone involved. But right now, you definitely see the best of the communities across all the different people that are working on helping.
I'll tell you what, Nick Hawkins, great to have you on the program this morning, and many thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ross.
Well, as we've been reporting this morning, the cyclone threat might have abated, but the storms and the winds do continue. And the real worry for communities in Queensland and New South Wales is the potential for flooding. Those floodwaters often take time to make their way through the river systems, and potentially that has an impact on food production in some of the most productive regions of this country. Joining me now, Richard Shannon, Chief Executive of the National Farmers Federation Horticulture Council, Craig Huff, Branch Chair of New South Wales Farmers in Murwillumbah, and Mitch Brindle, Brindlecombe, who is the Vice President of the Lockyer Valley Growers Association in Queensland. Mitch, can I just start with you, if that's okay? The Lockyer Valley is some of the most productive and fertile fruit and vegetable growing land in this country. How is it coping right now as these storms and obviously these fierce winds come through?
Yeah, good morning. We're going all right here in the Lockyer. We've had a few days to prepare as the cyclone's delayed or stalled, you could say, and it's finally crossed the coast and has reduced to a tropical low. But we're going all right. A general 30 mil of rain across the Lockyer Valley, which is actually quite welcomed. We haven't had too much destruction at this stage. We'd have a 20-knot wind from the east, but yeah, the rain has actually been very welcomed, but we certainly don't want destruction.
Yeah, OK. Craig Huff, I'll go to you. We spoke last week about exactly what would transpire. It clearly has not been as bad in terms of the cyclone coming across. Is it now flooding you're worried about?
Yeah, definitely flooding, Ross. We're still getting steady rain here, so the catchment is sodden. But it's not rain that's particularly heavy enough to possibly cause rivers to break their banks as such. But having said that, I mean, the early days, we did see already some soybean crop losses on the floodplain near Moolumbar. And we're just watching it closely because the rivers so far are managing to clear. But everyone's sort of just on a bit of a knife's edge, hoping that we don't get levee banks broken and major damage from what's occurring now.
I'll go to Richard Shannon from the National Farmers Federation from that Horticulture Council area. Now, the thing about this, Richard, is right now, fruit and vegetable crops and supplies, we know about cost of living. You know, one of the worst things that people around the country could really cope and manage with right now is a big increase in the price of their fruit and vegetables.
Look, I think we're unlikely to see a significant impact in terms of price at the checkout for fruits and vegetables as a result of this particular event. Looking backwards, you might recall the $11 lettuce, and before that, Cyclone Alfred had banana prices through the roof many years ago. Those are two exceptions, I suppose, that prove the rule that, generally speaking, we have a really diverse and diversified fruit and vegetable sector in Australia. There's many growing regions supplying the same produce into supermarkets and other retailers. And so it's rare that we have an event that affects one crop or commodity significantly enough to change prices on a national level.
Yeah, it's just interesting that. So one aspect of this is the diversity of supply is important. But of course, if you get something knocked out in one particular place, that's where it becomes quite vulnerable, doesn't it? Like you talk about the $11 lettuce.
That's right. And, you know, Mitch can talk to this in some more detail, but that was a rare event where the Lockyer Valley was affected by flooding, I think, 2 or 3 times in the space of 9 months. And it is a significant vegetable growing region. And that did have an impact on lettuce production. So, like also Cyclone Alfred years ago, banana production in Australia is highly concentrated in the far north Queensland wet tropics area. And that particular cyclone impacted that region heavily. Otherwise, we're really lucky in Australia. We are blessed with a number of different growing regions that supply the same sort of produce. So, this time around, not expecting any changes or impact on prices, as Mitch has said. In the Lockyer Valley right now, we haven't seen the sorts of rains that would cause a big disruption to supply, and hopefully that remains the case. We'll continue to watch, though, this system as it moves inland.
Well, I'll go back to Mitch Brindlecombe in the Lockyer Valley. Mitch, do you sense that farmers, are they still highly vulnerable to potential floods in the future, or have they become better at being able to manage the vagaries of the weather?
Yeah, it's a fair question. Over the years, we try and prepare our farms the best we can to handle these situations, but at the end of the day, our farms are generally in low-lying areas where the good soil is, but we do try and do what we can. I think at the moment, the production side isn't affected and shouldn't be affected, providing today plays out okay. But it's more of the logistics side, the delivery. People have been doing the right thing, staying home from work for the last few days. So there'll be a few disruptions in supply. Customers have been stocking up over the last few days, which is totally understandable. So it'll just take a little bit of time to get that produce back on the shelves. But at this stage, there shouldn't be too many production disruptions.
Well, we can only hope that it stays that way. I'll tell you what, Craig Huff, one other thing about this is farmers have copped, obviously, big increases in their insurance bills, big increases in their energy prices. Then you've obviously got the vagaries of the growing season. You've got big inquiries into supermarkets right now. So, you know, it's a hell of a time to be in the ag business right now because there are a whole bunch of stuff being thrown at you at the same time.
That's right, Ross. Particularly in our area here, it's quite common for farms to be on a smaller scale. And one of the things most people know these days is to be highly profitable in farming, you need bigger scale. So there's some unique challenges in this northeast corner. And what's happening, we're finding, is that we're not actually getting the support of some of the local government areas here. They're actually putting more imposts on farmers and making it difficult and diminishing the right to farm. So there's some challenges that we're facing as well. Things like having to get a DA to clear weeds and things like that in this particular area that I'm in is just making it really, really difficult for farmers.
So I just wonder whether politicians, whether this is a bit of a wake-up call for some of the difficulties that our food producers do have in trying to create that, Craig. I just get a sense that maybe this should have been a preparedness for a big weather event. You'd reckon and hope that maybe some of them would learn a few things about it.
Yeah, it's something that the New South Wales Farmers Association have been lobbying for a long time, is trying to create that awareness. And what's happened here locally is the message doesn't seem to be getting through. So when you do have those situations like having to get a DA to clear weeds on your farm, the cost of that is just astronomical because you typically have to get an ecology study with your development application. So there's some challenges ahead for farming in our little area in the northeast, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, and Richard Shannon, just go to that point because obviously horticulture is so important for Australia, not just for our own domestic supply, but also as an export industry as well. So, you know, there is a lot at stake to try and make certain that there are as few obstacles in front of our farmers as there possibly can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one significant or the leading part of our federal election platform, as it happens, is a national food plan. We're glad to see that the current government has agreed to pursue that should it win office. We expect the coalition to follow in a very similar way. We're calling for a plan to ensure that all the different government agencies that deal in some way with agriculture are working in a cohesive way and we're all pulling in one direction. At the moment, agriculture suffers because we deal with state governments when it comes to water and energy supply. Federal government when it comes to keeping pests and diseases out at the border. So we need a coordinated and cohesive plan for agriculture that's got all of these different government agencies pulling in the same direction. And as you mentioned, really importantly is expanding export markets overseas. We have a difficult time here getting the appropriate price for our produce with the domination of the supermarkets. We need to open up markets overseas to allow growers to get a better return.
I'll tell you what, it's going to be fascinating just to see how this goes. You would hope it's a wake-up call to government. It's clearly got the attention of the Prime Minister right now, who says it's his only focus. So you would hope that maybe some of those obstacles might disappear for the whole industry. Richard Shannon, Chief Executive of the National Farmers Federation Horticulture Council, Craig Huff, the Branch Chair of the New South Wales Farmers in Murwillumbah, and Mitch Brimblecombe, Vice President of the Lockyer Valley Growers Association. We trust you all stay, well, relatively dry and safe during these times. And many thanks for your time today. Well, coming up after the break, cut off a leg and save the body. We update you on how Star Entertainment is selling its crown jewel, the Queen's Wharf Casino in Brisbane, to try and save the company. And we find out how business is coping in the aftermath of Cyclone Alfred. Thanks so much for being with us here on Business Weekend. Well, late on Friday, the Star Entertainment finally came up with a deal that might ensure its survival, but it comes at a cost and with no guarantees for the future. The Star will sell half of the $3.6 billion Brisbane Queen's Wharf Casino for $53 million of cash, of which $35 million was paid immediately. That's just how desperately the business needed that cash to avoid collapse. But for that price, it will also sell the Treasury Hotel in Brisbane, the Treasury car park, and also 50% of another Brisbane car park. In return, apart from the cash, it will also get ownership of 2 hotels, one not yet built at its Gold Coast casino, which it will retain full ownership of. But there's also an earnout from future cash flows from the Brisbane casino of potentially up to $225 million. Now, the buyer of the Brisbane casino at that fire sale price is its existing 50% owners, the Hong Kong-based Chow Tai Fook Enterprises and the Far East Consortium. On Friday, Queensland Premier David Crisafulli, speaking with Peter Stefanovic here on Sky News, appeared to have few objections to the new ownership structure.
Our non-negotiable is that that place stays open during whatever that transition looks like. And we're willing and able partners to whoever wants to invest in Queensland. We are open for business, I can promise you that.
But for the Star, dangers do remain. Gaming revenues are well down, especially at its key Sydney casino. And there's still the matter of that penalty that the anti-money laundering agency AUSTRAC will hit it with. That's said to be potentially as much as $400 million. And that's many times what it just sold its half share of a $3.6 billion casino for. Now, as if business owners in northern New South Wales and South East Queensland haven't been through enough. There was COVID. Then the repeated floods in 2022, then inflation, energy prices, labour shortages and flagging consumer demand. Now there's the potential for more flooding. So let's bring in here 2 groups that represent business owners in those regions. Jane Laverty is the Regional Director of the Northern Rivers branch of Business New South Wales, based in Alstonville, and Heidi Cooper, the Chief Executive of Business Chamber Queensland, joins me now from Brisbane. Heidi, many thanks for your time. I'll start with you, if that's okay. I mean, a lot of business owners really were expecting the worst. It didn't perhaps turn out at the moment as badly as what people expected, but this event is not yet over.
Thanks for having us on again, Ross. This is such a challenging time for the business community. Everything that you've listed is exactly what it is that we're hearing from the business community. There are so many challenges out there, and now this is another one. What you're saying is right. We're hearing that some of the physical impacts that were predicted are not being seen at this stage. We are obviously still waiting, with great apprehension around what will happen from a flooding perspective. But I think what's really important here is to talk about all of the economic costs that's not as easy to see. So we're hearing from businesses across the region that this is just having an enormous impact economically and financially for them. When we spoke last week, we talked about a double whammy of impact, but we're now getting to a triple or even a quadruple whammy. We know that businesses had to spend a lot of money to prepare. They also have lost income. They have lost productivity. They now need to spend a lot of money to get their business back up and running. And at the same time, they're doing that while they have extraordinary ongoing operational and staff costs. These are impacts that we can't necessarily see, but they're an enormous impact on a business, and the businesses continue to bear this financial cost in times that were already challenging.
Yeah, it's so true. Jane, we heard from food producers in that Northern Rivers area, but the flow-on effect from their success into the businesses of that area, it might be local lawyers, it might be accountants, it might be shops, it might be produce suppliers, whatever it might be. But it has a flow-on effect right down the chain, doesn't it?
Oh, you're absolutely right, Ross, and thanks for having us on this morning. That business ecosystem, it's one that's very synergistic, one that needs everyone to be doing well, and everyone lifts each other. So when you have one area of the industry impacted, it absolutely impacts all. I think all of your comments there, it's like you were reading my list of advocacy points, because businesses have been doing it really tough. The Northern Rivers has taken its fair share of impacts from disaster events over the years, and it's only been 3 years since our last event. I really commend, though, our business community. They saw this coming. They had that advance warning. They put their plans into place. They're now coming out the other side, but we're not breathing easy yet, that's for sure. And we're keeping our eye on the rivers. We just don't want that water crossing the levees. But we're already thinking ahead and thinking about our checklist of needs to ensure businesses can pick up and get going again quickly. In terms of our farmers, they just continue to keep the knocks, and we will be advocating for every piece of support that they can get from local, state and federal governments. Indeed. If we don't have food on the tables for our community, everyone suffers. And these are small businesses. They're mum and dad businesses that just can't continue to be taking the hits.
No.
And cost of business is so bad that we don't want to add any further red tape to their operations.
It's so true, absolutely, Jane. It's well said. And also, many of those communities, as we spoke about earlier, with the head of the chief executive of IAG, need to be protected. If that's levies, that's what has to happen. Heidi, I want to come back to you because one issue that really strikes me is we've got record numbers of business collapses happening in Australia right now because of all of the things that we've mentioned. The one thing you wouldn't want to see is weather-based events such as this causing even more businesses to go broke.
Ross, you are absolutely right. It's a really challenging business environment out there right now. And then we put a natural disaster on top of it. And that's the reason why we need to be thinking about how it is that we support the business community, not just in times of crisis, but overall, so that we can have longer term success within the business community. We need to be looking at some of the barriers for businesses. We know that red tape and regulatory burden is extraordinarily prohibitive for businesses, regardless of their industry. You had some really clear examples from the farmers just before. I could extrapolate that across every industry and give you examples where regulatory burden is crippling and it means that businesses can't do what they need to do. We need to also ensure workforce. So your workforce is the number one issue that's raised with businesses. Supply chain, all of these issues are going to be exacerbated by a natural disaster. But what's also really important as well is how do we build the resilience of businesses outside of natural disaster events? And that's a lot of what we are talking to all levels of government about, because we can't continue to see this. We need to accept the reality that natural disaster is a part of business life in Queensland. So how do we support businesses? How do we make sure the business environment is right? They are resilient. They can adapt to some of the situations that they're experiencing. They put in place things in the good time that protect them in the challenging times. But we also need the right regulatory environment. We need the right insurance. We need the right workforce and skills so that businesses can be productive and they can weather some of these big issues that we're seeing right now.
Well, I tell you, it's a great subject and we'll keep on coming back to it. Jane Laverty, the Regional Director of the Northern Rivers branch of Business New South Wales, and also Heidi Cooper, Chief Executive of the Business Chamber from Queensland. Both of you, many thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. It's such an important issue and we're really appreciative of you putting it on your agenda.
Quite okay. I'll tell you what, we will continue to keep you up to date with everything that's taking place in Queensland and northern New South Wales. As we said, this event is not yet over by any stretch of the imagination. The rainfall is still incredibly heavy, and also on top of that, you've got significant wind. So there is still damage and flooding taking place in regional communities, and we will keep you up to date. Up next is all the latest news right here on Sky News. Now, Business Weekend will return next Sunday, but of course, you can keep up to date with all the latest business news with our daily program, Business Now, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and via our website, skynews.com.au. So thanks for your company. I'm Ross Greenwood. See you next week.